Thanks, Chet. And let me also welcome you to the Irvington Historical Society's 2020 Gala. My name is Scott Mosenthal, and it is my privilege to introduce this most inspirational legacy program to you today. First, on behalf of the Society, I would like to thank all of you for supporting this event. As a nonprofit, we totally depend upon the generosity of the public to support all that we do. That includes our newsletter, yearly displays at the McVicker House, scholarships for qualified high school students, and of course, regular programs of local historical interest. This is the second year that the Society has chosen to honor those people who have not only spent a significant portion of their lives in Irvington, but have also had a significant impact upon this village. The purpose of our Legacy project is multifaceted. We want not only to honor our venerable citizens for their contributions to Irvington, but also to record their oral histories of their time in this remarkable village for the everlasting benefit of those who have an interest in or connection to its rich history. That would be all of you. Last year at this time, we celebrated the inaugural group of 12 legacies at the Ardsley Country Club. Given this year's COVID-19 pandemic, we have taken a more creative approach. Fortunately, our interviews, recordings, and photographs were completed before the restrictions were imposed. So today, you will enjoy a documentary, roughly 40 minutes in length, highlighting the lives of 11 incredible individuals who have not only been profoundly impacted by their time in Irvington, but who have also left their indelible mark upon the village. I have been lucky enough to have interviewed a good number of these legacies. In my past life as the principal of Irvington High School, I had innumerable opportunities to speak to people from all walks of life. Nonetheless, I have never met a more memorable group of folks than the 23 legacies we have chosen to honor. In many ways, they are quite diverse with a wide range of backgrounds and experiences. In other ways, however, they share a number of singular characteristics. They are uniformly positive. Their glasses are significantly more than half full as they reflect upon their families, their friends, and their memories, all the while acknowledging the hardships and challenges that invariably come with lives long lived. They have grit. They are not daunted by setbacks, tough times, or personal challenges. Finally, they have developed what I consider to be a refreshingly sensible outlook on life. As one of last year's legacies and my good friend, Bob Connick, often says, they have learned to take it one day at a time. Speaking with any one of them is akin to taking an intimate walk down the Irvington memory lane. This afternoon, you will have the opportunity to take that walk with this year's 11 legacies. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our video. Once again, our sincere thanks for joining us.
I remember walking down Main Street and knowing absolutely everyone that I saw, and their brothers and their sisters and their parents. Irvington was like one big family in those days. You literally knew everyone. And of course, they knew you and your family, so you really couldn't get away with much. Elizabeth, did I see Harriet at the corner store again yesterday? Yes, probably. The corner store at the top of Main Street in Broadway was the local hangout for us. When school was over, we would rush up the street to get a booth and talk about the day's happenings while sipping cherry cokes. Jimmy, George, and Peg kept us in line and would eventually tell us it was time to leave, and we would gather ourselves up and head reluctantly for home. The Main Street School was the only school I ever attended from 6th grade through 12th. My first teacher was Miss Emily Petrie. She was the first of many wonderful teachers that I had at that school. This is also where and when I met the classmates that would be my friends for the next 6 years and beyond. Some of us still get together every year for a reunion, thanks to Barbara Carosi, who organizes it. Miss Helen Stubby was the girls' phys ed teacher and also the cheerleading coach. I remember that we were the only cheerleading squad that had to wear our skirts below the knee. Miss Stubby's orders. All the other girls wore theirs mid-thigh. We always felt a little matronly when we did a meet and greet at halftime with the other squads. And then there was Miss Benjamin, who was the Girl Scout leader. That's Isabel K. Benjamin, whose name graces the rec center on Main Street. The first thing she would do at the Wednesday afternoon meetings at the St. Barnabas Parish Hall was an inspection. We would line up and she would see that our uniforms were properly in order. I remember once having the wrong color shoes on. I think they were brown and they were supposed to be black or vice versa. Anyway, my mother got a phone call and I never made that mistake again. I still have my Brownie and Girl Scout pins in my jewelry box. I didn't know if Miss Benjamin would approve of me disposing of them. I remember when the Korean War started and how disturbed we all were about another war. It seemed that World War II had just ended, and here we were doing it again. I had an older brother who actually fought in World War II, and I remember when he finally came home, we had to tiptoe around the house as he was suffering from PTSD, although in those days they called it shell shock. He eventually was able to return to normal, but it was a very long journey. So many years later, I moved back to Irvington with my new husband. We rented the second floor of 120 Main Street, the former McCabe house. This is where we were living when our daughter was born. My husband, Ken Kelly, who passed away in 2013, was one of the original members of the Irvington Volunteer Ambulance Corps. In 1964, we moved to Carla Lane in the Dinans' former house where our son was born. And finally, to Ardsley Terrace, next door to Ibbot's Nap, where we lived for 32 years. I am now living in Mount Kisco, but my heart will always be in Irvington.
We moved to Sunnyside Lane about 1933. I went to the Irvington school before that because Dad and Mom made arrangements for us to go there from second grade with Miss Brewer. Our house backed onto the Croton Aqueduct, and that was a central part of my whole life as a boy because I could walk everywhere and I could ride a bike most everywhere. I could go to Dobbs Ferry probably faster than you could go in a car, and I could go halfway to Tarrytown. The playground was just east of the school in Irvington, and I remember that at that time all kids, all boys anyway, had jackknives. It was part of what you had, and we played mumbledy-peg. Every one of us had a little jackknife, and we opened up the blade and played mumbledy-peg and then folded them up and put them away. There was no problem whatsoever in the school with the fact that any of us had a jackknife. It was like having a pencil or a pen in your pocket. The other big thing in the playground, of course, was marbles. I go to Becker's on Main Street, but not for baseball cards. I collected Indian cards, and they came with gum. And they taught me more about Indian lore than the tribes and the chiefs and all the gear they used. And I would buy those cards. I used to have a big wad of them. And they had a lot more meaning to me than baseball cards. Mom got rid of them when I went into the service, and it bothers me because it was a very unique collection. Saturday afternoons was a big event because they had afternoon movies in Tarrytown at the music hall there, which were cowboy movies, and they would be a couple of cartoons with them and so forth, and a March of Time. And Russell and Laurie's was on the corner, which was a soda counter. They had stools all along the counter, and after the show we would go there, sit on the stools and get our ice cream sodas. And then we'd get on the bus and go home. The bus was very reliable. It was a small bus, and it went, I guess, from Ossining to Yonkers, and it took us along, and we paid 10 cents. We would use it all the time and get where we wanted to go before we were allowed to ride bicycles. Eventually, I was even allowed to ride a bicycle, and rode to White Plains, and I would ride over to White Plains on my bicycle and buy records. There was a record store there, and that's when records were beginning to come along, and the wonderful Glenn Miller era. So I would ride over there and buy them at the record store and ride back, and boy, you had to be gentle with them because records broke very easily in those days, and in the wintertime they broke more easily.
This is Bob Mackey. In March 1951, we moved from the Bronx to 35 South Broadway. I had 7th grade to complete, but had to travel to the New York Central and my subway up to 161st Street to All Hallows School, about an hour and 10 minutes each way. My mother asked Jack Lynch, who was the paper boy for Cedar Hill Apartments, to meet me, which was a great, happy success for me. In September, I went into the 8th grade at Immaculate Conception School in Irvington. In the afternoons, I hung out with the paper boys on the north side of Main Street. I soon got my own route, which was the upper third of Main Street and the great houses of Matheson Park. I got a great education working between two economic classes. In the early 50s, we formed the Jokers, whose members wore an old fedora hats and met at John Drake's home on South Continent Street. Members included Don Costello, Matt Wall, Chris Glenn, John Hurley, Jack Lynch, and Barry Sutherland. The fall of 1952, I started at Archbishop Stepanak High School on the far side of White Plains. Jack Lynch, who was a grade ahead of me, showed me how to hitchhike to White Plains bus station. At the start of junior year, after I turned 16, I drove to Stepanak in a used green Packard called the Green Pig by my friends, whom I charged for gas. On April 15, 1955, the night before my 17th birthday, I attended a Newman Club dance at Irvington's high school gym. We, boys, gathered and talked, as did the girls. Then someone passed potatoes out to the boys with instructions to pick out a girl, place the potatoes between our foreheads, and dance. I picked Kathy Manfredi from Tarrytown. I had only a junior license, so I couldn't take her home. Instead, I went with some other people to a grill near White Plains, where I had my first gin and tonic and met a second girl from the Newman dance. Wow. But I didn't forget Kathy. 5 years later, after I graduated from Yale in 1960, we were married. We lived in a small apartment in New York City where I worked as a stock trader. After our first child, Rob, was born, we moved back to Irvington to Half Moon Apartments. Then later bought a home in Phillips Manor. In 1967, we, Kathy, Rob, Kelly, Siobhan, and I moved back to Irvington and stayed in that house for 30 years.
I remember Irvington during the World War II years. When they put up the honor roll, it was on the school property and the aqueduct and Main Street. And it was quite memorable to see people I knew. All of a sudden, the gold star would go up on it. And I knew what that meant. People I knew. Harold Mazaris's brother died in the war. Pete Robinson died in the war. The draft board and the rationing board were in a building on Main Street. And the aqueduct, if you turned 18, you could be in high school. They would draft you and take you out of high school. I also remember there was what they called the Hilltop Club, and it was women whose husbands were in the war and girlfriends of guys also at war. They rented a store in the corner building. They would be in there knitting socks, making up packages for the soldiers and sending them to their boyfriends and husbands. The other thing was Joe Shunk's gas station, which is the gas station right on the corner of Broadway. It had a huge bin there he set up, and people would throw iron in it, metal, and a truck would come by every month, pick it up, and that was certainly a good thing for the war effort. When a soldier came home, Joe Shunk's station would become a greeting place for them. On Saturday night, the Hilltop Club would organize this and would have a band and beer, and people would dance into the night. At the end of the war, they had a block party on South Buckout Street, and our garage was used as the bar for the party, which my dad really liked. There was a big black dock out from Nyack, and the dock was used for an army camp. After the war, the ships would come up the river with soldiers. First time back into the United States, they debarked on the dock and they were discharged from the camp. We would take a rowboat and row out from Irvington to the dock, and they would throw us candy and things. Their helmets had a liner in them. They would throw those to us as well. We probably were the first Americans these soldiers talked to.
I'm Theodosia. I was born in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1939 to Alonzo and Rosetta Smith. I'm the youngest of 6 children. My family were farmers and we lived in the country. We didn't have the amenities that we have today. Racism was prevalent during that time. At the age of 6, my family moved to White Plains, New York from Alabama. Then we moved to North White Plains. My children attended Valhalla Public School. In 1971, we moved to Tarrytown, raising my children as a single parent. My children attended the Irvington School District. When my children first arrived in Irvington, they were not welcome and they had their first taste of discrimination. And my family and I had to adjust to that. My 5 children, Tony Ann Palmer, Jean Bivens, who's deceased, Carla, Michael, known as Tank, and Felicia. They were very active in school. Carla, Felicia, and Jean, they did a lot of singing and dancing. Tony was a social butterfly. In my younger years, I would sing and dance all the time. I was even given the opportunity to sing and dance at Carnegie Hall in my youth. I guess you can say it runs in the family. A majority of my time was spent working as an employee of Westchester County, so there was not much time for socializing. When I was able to attend an event that one of my children were participating in, it wasn't a good feeling. Just as I taught my children that not everybody is going to like them, I could empathize with them during those times, as other parents would not want to be in my vicinity. But I am so thankful to the Blooms, the Corellis, the Dumases, the Nellies, and the Gilardi families, to name a few, who made my children feel welcome and that they belonged. My children also had help of a great many teachers, with Mr. Dobb, Dr. Mosenthal, Mr. Winter, and Mr. Pinker. I heard it said it takes a village to raise a child, and these teachers, as well as other faculties, helped me in doing so. I try to continue to instill my children right from wrong, no matter how old they may be. They're still not too old to learn. Being a cancer survivor makes you appreciate each day that God gives you. I am getting older, and we know that these bodies are not meant to last forever, but I'm taking care of it to the best of my ability, and I still have more living and teaching to do.
I was born in 1929, and I grew up in Hastings. I ran track in high school, and I remember hearing about the Great Babe Dining in Irvington. I moved to Dutchess Street in Irvington not long after getting out of the Navy in 1955, and worked for a time at Lord & Burnham's. Once things slowed down there, I took a job at Tappan Cleaners in Irvington, delivering clothes. I got to know most of the people in town. The most interesting moment was when I was dropping off some clothes. I smelled something burning, wondering what it was, and then discovered it was my delivery truck. The clothes in the truck didn't make it. The best thing I ever did was taking a job in the village on the highway department. I worked there for 17 years. In the winter, I was the guy who was called in to plow sidewalks during the night because the younger guys wanted no part of that. Also, if they did it, they'd just do the Main Street sidewalks the whole damn storm. Me, I'd plow the sidewalks on Main Street, all the side streets off Main Street, the sidewalk on Broadway north to Sunnyside. I took my coffee breaks at Zerilli's Deli. During a bad storm, he'd stay open all night because he lived over the bridge and didn't want to deal with the ride home. I worked a change on the sidelines for the Irvington football games for 23 years as a volunteer with Dick Livingston. I liked the kids and the coaches. The job is harder than it looks. You can get run over if you're not paying attention. In 1974, a crew from Saturday Night Live came to Irvington and went to the Broadway Bar Grill to find out who was the funniest person in Irvington. The guys at the bar told them it was Wood-Eye, my nickname based on a joke. And then they interviewed me. They were as funny as hell. Kids would come home from college from around the country and tell me they saw me on TV. I always tried to take care of the people. If you do your job, you never have any problems.
My great-grandfather, William M. Roy, was a Scottish immigrant and arrived in Irvington in 1887, and our family has been here ever since. He worked for a time at Lord & Burnham and also as a gardener on some of the great Irvington estates. My grandfather, Malcolm M. Roy, was born in 1888, graduated from the Irvington High School in 1904, the first of 4 generations. He built our home on Fargo Lane in 1954. He started Sunnyside Savings and Loan in 1930 and owned the Irvington Gazette, a local newspaper that existed from 1907 to 1969. My dad, Robert S.D. Roy, was born in 1917. He was a lawyer and a judge for the town of Greenburgh from 1947 to 75. People would say that the SD stood for 60 days or sudden death. He also served as president of the Irvington School Board. He was also president of the Sunnyside Federal Savings and Loan from 1960 to 1984. I was born in 1944. We lived on North Dutcher Street. As a kid, I was part of the Dutcher Street Gang, a group consisting of the Roys, the McHughes, the Krauses, Warnocks, Campbells, and Rileys. We played baseball and kickball on McAfee's Field, guns in Jaffrey Park, stickball on the street where we would paint lines. We watched the condos in Half Moon being constructed, the gym at North Ferris Street being built. When Jaffrey Park was built, for fun, we would move the survey sticks a few inches. Stores which we frequented on Main Street included Krause's Market, the Grand Union, Gristides, Peter Reeves, Becker's. Mrs. Becker routinely would ask after I bought something there, "Are you sure your dad said you could buy it?" And then there was Thiel's Bakery. The horseshoe pastry was the greatest. I ran for Pete Owe's track team. We would run up at Memorial Park where he would stake out a course. Coach Ole ran with us, which meant we couldn't slack off. I graduated from college in 1966 and was drafted in 1967. I served in the Army for just over 21 months, with 1 year in Vietnam, which included the Tet Offensive. I started working in the family bank before my stint in the Army. And when I retired from the bank in 2008, I was president. When I started at the bank, there was $8 million in assets. When I retired, it was over $100 million. I am a life member of the Irvington Volunteer Ambulance Corps, IVAC, having served for over 45 years. Irvington has been a wonderful place to raise our family. All 3 children graduated from the Irvington High School. But we are moving to Pennsylvania to reduce our taxes and to be closer to some of our grandchildren.
My name is Joseph L. Lombardi, and I was born in Manhattan in 1940. I moved to Irvington in 1953. The new Irvingtonites were New York City families who, as part of the suburbanization of America, were escaping the cities because of concerns about crime, schools, and the physical environment. The newcomers had parents who were commuters, while the parents of the existing families primarily worked locally. Although most of the local youngsters had grown up together, we eventually all bonded with our commonality being the Irvington High School, the wonderful 1913 brick school building on Main Street. At that time, the store on the corner of Broadway and Main Street was the hangout. It had booths and a counter where you could get a sandwich and a milkshake. At the end of the school day, it was popular for high school students to gather there. The 4 years of high school in Irvington were a delight in the classic American way of the 1950s, going to football games, dating cheerleaders, and attending a small high school. I had a newspaper route on West Clinton Avenue and was very much aware of the Octagon House because I delivered the newspaper there. The Octagon House influenced me because it showed me how extraordinarily fascinating an older house could be. When I was 38 years old and practicing restoration architecture in New York City, the Octagon House owner, Carl Karmer, gave an interview to the New York Times saying that he was interested in disposing of the house. There was a developer with the bright idea of tearing down the Octagon House, getting a variance to create 8 houses on the land, and calling it Octagon Park. I obtained a meeting with Carl and explained that I was intent on conserving the Octagon House. Eventually, the National Trust acquired the Octagon House and sold it to me so I could conserve it. The village, in their wisdom, spearheaded by Connie Kehoe, created a way in which the Octagon House could become a house museum, thus providing a way for future generations to fully appreciate it.
We lived on North Broadway in a house my father traced back to 1800. There were no children our ages, and we were eventually 7 children, so we were very self-contained. My mother made friends with Mrs. Newberry, who lived in Shadowbrook. I also remember going to visit the Mrs. DuPont Irving, Washington Irving's nieces, who lived at Sunnyside during the summer. I remember having tea with these ladies. We also got eggs from the Kinneys and the Jacks. We skated on the pond of the estate, which is now Pintail Road. We all went to ICS. There were 4 classrooms on the first floor, a bathroom in the basement, and the nuns lived on the top floor. The town hall was an important part of our lives. There were always activities such as contests at Halloween for best costume. Girl Scouts met there some years, and most important to us was the library. Miss Woodruff was the librarian, and Mrs. Robertson was in charge of the children's room. Miss Woodruff often told us stories about what Irvington was like when she was growing up. I took piano lessons with Miss Valentine, who was a teacher in the Main Street School. When the Girl Scouts moved to St. Barnabas, Miss Benjamin was in charge. She took us walking around the village, showing us various trees. She also took us to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City on a very special Girl Scout Sunday, and we marched up the aisle. We did not get a TV until I was 9 years old. We read books and turned them into plays, which we put on. I was the writer and director. In the summer, we spent most of our days in the pool. The rest of the year, we rode our bikes and explored. We particularly liked the land at the back of Statham's, 111 North Broadway. There was a lovely playhouse and a Quonset hut. We spent many hours playing there. My mom ran a preschool for about 10 years in our home. She had a quiet room with a painting easel, blocks, and a table for clay and other arts and crafts. The noisy room was across the hall where the children could go in and sing and do whatever they wanted in a loud way. There was a jungle gym made out of wood with a slide on one side and a mattress at the bottom of the slide. There were swings and a collection of tricycles outside. My father was mayor of Irvington for 2 terms. When he was elected, the village was in debt. When he left, there was enough of a surplus to give raises to the employees and a large amount to fund the new firehouse. I worked as a page in the library, which was then in the town hall, and later as a librarian, and then became the director from 1985 to 2005. Building a new library in the old Lord & Burnham building was very exciting to me. The library board was very supportive and worked hard to make the new library a reality.
A native son of Irvington, I'm known to most people as Dick. I grew up with my siblings Robert and Alice in the Toohey family home at 60 Main Street, a multi-generational residence. Our family lived there from the mid-1850s through 2015, when my wife Frances and I sold it and moved to Rhode Island. The Toohey family has a long history of public service in Irvington. My great-aunt Margaret, Aunt Alice, and Cousin Kate all taught in Irvington schools. Uncle John served as village trustee and fire chief. Uncle Jerry worked for the sanitation department. Aunt Mary worked at the post office, and my father was an Irvington police officer. Main Street was home to Uncle Harry's pharmacy, and Uncle Martin's veterinary business was located on the current site of Sunnyside Federal Savings and Loan Association. Childhood days were spent playing kick the can, against the gutter, and other outdoor games, all ending in time for the 5 o'clock radio stories or when the streetlights came on. As we got older, we would cut through Goat Alley and gather for fun with other neighborhood kids in a vacant lot on South Dutcher Street. In time, we crossed Main Street, venturing to the north side streets, where there was a playground on the site of the current Main Street School Gymnasium. Happy summer memories included crabbing and fishing along the Hudson's docks and rocks, various neighborhood jobs, and the anticipated reward of jumping off the dock at Matheson Park for a cooling swim. Not too many families had cars to go shopping, but we were lucky. All we had to do was cross the street. I recall being sent to the Grand Union for 25 cents worth of soup greens, Krause's Meat Market for cube steaks, where I watched the butcher cube them, Thiel's Bakery for cookies, cakes, and other treats, and Barney Riley's Deli for sodas and wedges. For seasonal clothes, haberdasher Mr. Lewis's store was the go-to place, while Becker's stationery store was where we bought our comic books. My memories of World War II remain strong and clear, supporting the war effort by returning foil from my dad's cigarettes and bringing collected cooking grease to Gristedes, car headlights painted to minimize illumination, rationing of food, and seeing Irvington's young men and women returning to the village in their military uniforms. Our family home was directly across the street from DeCara's restaurant, where many welcome home celebrations were held for returning servicemen and women, with the sounds of ukuleles and singing filling the streets. I graduated from Irvington High School in 1954 with many warm memories of supported teachers and wonderful schoolmates. As part of the athletic program, I was Irvington High School's first Con Ed award winner. I am truly a product of Irvington. The close-knit community of family, friends, and neighbors was so helpful in raising the shy and quiet child I once was. And even if life and times were troubling, Irvington always was a haven, a home from birth to senior citizen.
My name is Barbara Kirk-Rosie. I have lived in East Irvington all my life. I'm the youngest of 9 children who had a wonderful growing up period. To me, it was idyllic, really. I had loving parents who were very hard workers. My father was a gardener for Lyndhurst and all the big estates on Broadway. He had 2 green thumbs. He could do anything with a plant. And my mother did everything in the home. We really did live off our land. We had chickens. We had a garden that went forever. My father would plant about 200 tomato plants, and my mother made stewed tomatoes, tomato sauce, whatever else you can do with tomatoes. And we had grapes. So we had grape juice and grape jelly. We really did live off the land, and all 9 of us grew to be healthy and happy individuals. We had no processed anything. My mother made bread and dessert, always the same kind of dessert. She called it war cake because it was a recipe from World War II that used bacon fat in it. As weird as it sounds, it was the most delicious cake you could eat. I've never tasted anything so good. We also had fruit trees, so in the middle of winter, my mother would open up a jar of pears or peaches or whatever else she had preserved, and it was just a wonderful treat. My mother and father were Irish immigrants from the northern part of Ireland. My mother was from a small village near Belfast. My father was from a village called Swanland Bar. He was one of 12 children born into a very poor family, and my mother had 1 brother and was orphaned as a very small child. So their childhood was hard, but they ended up meeting each other, falling in love, and having 9 children who absolutely adored them. Many years later, I can remember sitting in my mother's living room, and it was St. Patrick's Day. And we looked, and there was a car in the driveway. And it was a fellow from East Irvington. It was a friend of my brother's growing up. He had been raised by a grandma or an aunt, And my mother would often make him socks and mittens, just as she was doing for her own children. So this man gets out of the car, comes in, and he gets to the door and he says, "It's St. Patrick's Day." I thought, who are my two favorite Irish people? Mr. and Mrs. Kerr. So he came in carrying a big flower arrangement of green and white carnations. My mother was so very, very touched. My father too. So as my mother is going on and on thanking him profusely, he said, "Are you kidding? How many meals did I have here? How many times did I just show up at supper time?" There was always a friend at that table. There was always somebody, and really, my mother could take one steak and feed 25 people. I am not kidding you. And we all left just fine. Nobody was hungry. We were all satisfied. But of course, we did eat a lot of potatoes.